So I want to talk about the origins of ProMeme, where it came from, and how it ended up in the industry, in any industry. First of all, it started off in medicine back in Vanderbilt University about 15 years ago. We're working on education processes for doctors, because doctors, as you probably would understand, can't really work on live patients when they're practicing. And so we had to design instances of situations and challenges that they would solve as teams. And from that, we ended up with an educational program that was based on challenge cycles. At that point, we didn't have all the pieces in it. We knew it was close because it was pretty successful, and we began to experiment with colleges and teachers in professional development. And what transpired was we came across a concept known as engagement through initial thoughts, which hadn't been experimented in the past. What that did, we weren't sure, but we knew we were onto something in terms of its capacity for helping people to be engaged and leaning into a project as opposed to passively accepting. And that was the problem with the doctors at that point, that they were sitting at lectures, receiving information, trying to process it, and really experiencing something called cognitive overload. We knew what cognitive overload was, but we didn't know the impact it was having on the audience. So from there, we moved it to a design-based experimental research place at the University of Washington, where we worked with teachers, schools, and then eventually into industry. We started off in places like Microsoft and Amazon, and ended up in the Boeing company, which these are all headquartered in Seattle, right next to the University of Washington, where I work. We received a $50 million grant from the National Science Foundation. The National Institutes of Health were interested in parts of it, but the National Science Foundation actually supplied the money. So we had a 10-year project to study how people learn, and from that emerged the evidence-based research that we talk about that's associated with ProMeme today. So let me start off by saying what ProMeme is, and then what it does and how it could impact not only just educational communities, medical societies or communities, and any industry. In fact, any organization where people have to communicate and where people have implicit knowledge, that's knowledge that has been built up over years and years of practice and processes that have been part of the corporate structure and their workforce. So what happens typically is that as communities gain experience and become proficient in their work, they move along the expertise chain and get to a point where they're able to solve problems and do the work that they're asked to do without basically having to exert too much brain power, because they've solved these problems before. These are called sequestered problem-solving situations. Sequestered meaning that they've already had experience here and they know how to do it, and problem-solving because they're in the same area but just being more they're more successful at working on these projects. So then we found very rapidly that working with doctors or working with lawyers or working with dentists or working with engineers or teachers, it didn't make any difference. The same principles applied when it came to capturing, distributing, and understanding, making sense of knowledge. And we were very quick to understand that there's different types of knowledge. There's implicit knowledge and explicit knowledge. The implicit knowledge is the one that the corporations typically are very interested in, because these are the nuggets, the golden nuggets of their work relationships with themselves and with the outside world. And to be able to capture and disseminate that information, not only to their core groups, but also to new employees and to people that they'd be interested in sharing with. That's a very interesting part of this whole process. And so what happens from a neurological standpoint, why this thing works, is where I'm going to go next. We didn't start off thinking like this. We didn't start off by saying, let's bring neuroscience into this whole area and see what we can do. We started off trying to solve a problem. Our solution worked very well, but we didn't know why. And as soon as we began to look at the neurological basis for the evidence that was happening, then we realized what we had stumbled onto. The first thing was that we had people who were intensely engaged and stayed with the project in spite of cognitive load or challenges that would typically have exerted pressures to people to give up or to abandon the situation or not even get engaged. And we refer to that as either people who are either passive about situations or actively engaged in the situations. And I'd like to define active as not people standing up, moving around, doing something, talking, but active in terms of taking agency, and agency being a metacognitive function of thinking about their own thinking and acting on their own knowledge so that they can make sense and own that knowledge. And so our definition of active knowledge and active learning is critical, and very few people follow that through to its typical end, where it should be not just a matter of giving people a break every 15 minutes or having enough food on the table, but in fact people taking control of their own learning, and the facilitator or the teacher can step out and not even be involved. It didn't matter whether we were working with doctors, teachers, lawyers, dentists, engineers. It didn't matter, because the problems that we needed to solve were the same across the board. Two things that popped up. First of all, the question of content versus time seemed to be the ubiquitous problem. People had so much content and so little time, and we knew the solution to that. We already had a solution to it. The second problem that we knew people wanted to solve was, as their workforce got older, we found that typically the people with the grey hairs, even though they thought they were passing their information down to the new hires and the intermediate workers, they typically left the company with the nuggets of the information still installed in their brains, because this knowledge was not made visible easily, and it was what we call implicit. And implicit knowledge is the accumulated experience over the longevity of the worker's life, with the mistakes and all of the items that they had learned because of those mistakes and experiences of other people shared, and time. And so it's not easy to tell somebody, let us know what you know. And we also had a solution to that problem, and both of those problems are solved in this ProMeme model of operation here, which we think is ideal for not only capturing and transferring knowledge, but also for disseminating knowledge to within organizations and across organizations. So let me step back 1 minute. When I talked about the challenge at the beginning, I should have also said that I like, and from experience it works better, to have a challenge to be about 2 minutes also, and a nice video. And the challenge would show the problem that we have designed, and the challenge would then say, an invitation to who's in the room present, say, I would like you guys to join me in this challenge to solve the issue, and this is the challenge, and you say those words. It might be, what is the blah, blah, blah. And so it's very clear from the beginning and all the way through what challenge I'm working on, so that we can't get sidestepped into some issues and sinkholes that would take our energy. Okay, so now I'm going to move on to beyond the multiple perspectives, where we get to have the first moment of reflection. And this is a critical part where we're going to instigate the metacognitive function that we started with the initial thoughts. So the initial thoughts was where I wrote down what I thought I knew, and then I listened to some information, and now I get another minute or maybe 2 minutes. It depends on how your audience is moving with the information. And in that time, I get to write down what has happened in terms of where I am with the information I just heard. And so I reflect on the content that I just learned on that multiple perspective section, and I answer 3 questions. The 3 questions are always the same. And the 3 questions are always the same because it's an iterative cycle, and so after a while I don't have to even say the questions because my audience knows them. And the more times we do it, the more they're familiar with the questions, and the more their thinking patterns are primed to be responsive and to be agent-free based on the paradigm that has just happened in their thinking. which we'll talk about later. And so the 3 questions are, what was surprising to me about what I just saw or heard? What did I already know, but now I see it in a new light? And the 3rd question is, what do I still need help with? So the 3 questions, let's look at them from a neurological or a neuroscientific point of view for a second. The surprise element always helps people to be in their prefrontal cortex, because if I'm surprised about something, I have to think and I have to think forward and backwards, and I have to place one thing against another so I can see the differences. And so I'm really using that prefrontal section where I have to plan and predict and think and all of that. And if I'm in my prefrontal cortex, I can't be in my amygdala, and that's what I want. I do not want them in their amygdala, which is their fear-based, they're fear-driven, and their survival place. I want them in their predictive place. And so surprising is good because it liberates them into thinking in a new way, and that's what I want. And they haven't yet even shared anything. It's still reflective. The second question is, I saw this, I knew it, but now I see it different. And that's a critical point because it establishes the whole concept of the idea that our memory is almost self-repeating. You hear somebody says, I knew that. Well, I may not know it, but because I hear you saying it, I think I know it. But it's only when I begin to articulate it that I really make sense of it, and I then can own it. So to get to the agency place, that tiny little piece here where I saw it, I knew that, but now I see it in a new way. And by articulating the new way, I'm actually doing a cognitive rehearsal, and I'm in my brain. What's happening is I'm building new little synaptic connections, and I can almost feel the myelination happening in there because that's what's going on. So this is all neuro-based. And the 3rd thing then is, for the person who hasn't a clue what's happening, you say, oh my God, I have never heard anything like this before, I need help. And this is a place for it. It's a safe place, and I'm saying it honestly, I do need help. That's a big shift from, I don't want to look stupid, I don't want to be the person that's not going to let the team down, all that kind of stuff. Okay. So now we've moved on from that. It takes a minute, maybe 2 minutes at the most, but I have now written down something on those 3 questions. I get into a small group situation around my table. Maybe 5 people is ideal for that. 5 because if you have 4, then you might have no vote. You might have to vote on something. 5 is good because you have 3 versus 2 or whatever. 6 is okay, 7 is okay, but beyond that is too big. So 5 is my ideal number. 3 is too small. So what happens then is, in that little group, we have role playing. Somebody is a timekeeper, somebody's a scribe, and somebody's going to be the spokesperson, and somebody might be the person that keeps them on track. And so everybody has a role, and it's defined. But the critical piece here is that the second time around, we shift the role. So we just move one to the side, one left and one right. And so now you're the timekeeper and I'm the scribe. So that everybody feels they're contributing. Very important, they're tiny little pieces, but they are now contributing. They're not sitting back thinking, he always gets the best jobs or something, and how come I always get to play the triangle, they get to play the piano and the drums, and this is the point. It's like, I'm no good, he drives a bigger car than me, and all that stuff puts me back in my amygdala. But if I'm doing some work, I'm in my prefrontal cortex, I have to be in control of that. And by the way, you're out of time, and you should be taking notes, and my job is to keep you guys on target. And we have 15 minutes, because that's the time I'm allotted, and I want you to do the 3 questions. So that means 5 minutes per question, maybe. So, we're sitting around the table as a group of 5, and we're discussing the 3 questions. And somebody says, I was surprised that, whatever. And somebody says, me too, I can't believe it, you were surprised? And somebody says, no, I was surprised about this. And suddenly everybody is now part of the herd. Nobody is left out. It's a very inclusive thing. And they all can be surprised, and they can be surprised at different things, and they feel it's okay. That's a very important piece, because they are not being excluded for a start, but they're also seeing that they have a contribution to make. Even though it might be a silly surprise, there's room for that, because it's a surprise. So there's a free card, it's get out of jail card. And then the second part is, what did you see, or what did you know, but now you see differently? And this one is where they say, well, I knew that, but now I see how the nuance over here. And as they begin to talk that, then our scribe is saying, well, what are we going to say? Because because the end task here of this table is that they have to report out to the bigger group, and so the scribe is writing down, so what do you mean? And so they're talking and they're getting their notes ready for the bigger production. And so because he's the one going to be on show here, he's keeping everybody say, what do you mean that you don't understand that? What does that mean? What don't you understand? And so he's got the 3 points. And then they say, is there anything we don't understand? They say, oh, I didn't really get the thing about you say, oh, but I think that's about, no, it's about, and so they're now asking the questions before they go out in the bigger hall. They're in a safe space they've just created among themselves. They're actually doing a microcosm of the macrocosm, and it's a good space to be. So the time is up, and the facilitator says, okay, now we're going to go into the bigger community here again. There's 10 groups or 5 groups, whatever, and we're going to take group number 1, and you guys are going to stand up, and your spokesperson is going to tell us the answer to the 3 questions that you guys got. What surprised you? What did you already know, etc., and what do you still need help with? And then the first person stands up and he says, well, our group, now he's not talking about himself, it's a very safe place. Our group, he's got 4 people behind him, said that we were surprised about these 2 things. And somebody over across the room says, oh my God, we were the same, we had the same thing. And then he says, no, well, we thought something. And so now we've got this little group has now become the whole space, and it's still safe. And the safety part is the critical piece. And so now, when we get past the first group, second group takes over and they do the same thing, and each group then can contribute comments. And when it's finished, we find out that the scribe or the facilitator has been keeping notes in the background on a big screen or whatever board he's got, and all their big ideas have been captured. It might be video, it might be on a whiteboard, it doesn't matter. And those big ideas have been bubbling up. And then at the end of this, which could be 20 minutes, it depends on how many people you have. We have gone around the cycle here, and we have now gone to the report out phase, and that report out phase is where the new ideas begin to bubble up, and that's where the paradigm shift really happens. And at the end of that, they say, okay, where are we? And then you come up with the solution that says, well, for today we have solved this part, but it seems like we've asked 5 new questions. And so what I suggest we do is we have an iterative cycle again around one of these big items. And now, because we as a group invested our time and our efforts into this, we own it, and we're part of the discussion, and we feel we want to run it. And so that's the critical piece. The second time around, of course, it's a lot easier because they know the questions, they're already primed into initial thoughts, reflective moments, and nobody has collected any of their thoughts or their moments, and they can put them in their bag, take them home, or they can share. It's up to them. And they feel that it's a very safe space, and at the end of that, you have solved some of the problems, but you've also elicited enough information to know where to go forward. That's the critical piece about it, that it's not somebody coming in and saying, there, you got the right answer, you got an A, you got a B, and you're already going back to work thinking, man, I'm never again going to one of these things. Those chairs were the hardest chairs I've ever sat on. And you know, these things are not important. The point is, it was all cerebral. It was all about emotions. You had affective and effective. The affective meaning the emotional content, the effective meaning it was efficient and it was clean and was safe. So I'll stop there and I'll say where we are and who I am.